Hi everyone, my name is Jake Smeester and I am the Creative Services Specialist for Amazon Sumerian. Today we are going to be covering and creating an alarm system that is using the state machine and event listeners. What we will create, I will just go ahead and switch over to my screen. First pull this up. Okay, you just already heard that sound. Okay, so what we have here is we have a mat or a circle that once the cursor crosses or hovers on top of that circle, an alarm is tripped, and that flag will go down and up as the cursor crosses paths with the mat. So let's watch. Hear that really annoying sound, and if I hover again, the flag will go back up. Okay, so how do we do this? This involves a lot of lights, it involves the movement of the flag, it involves some sound, it involves a lot of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this scene and start a new one. I've already had one going, so, oh, no, actually not this one. This is the one I just was in. So let me exit out again, back to the dashboard. Click on this alarm system, it's just an empty scene. Okay. There's nothing in here except the grid and a default camera. All right, so the first thing that we are going to add is that mat or a circle. I tend to kind of go back and forth and call them two different things. So what I did is I clicked Create Entity, and then under 2D Shapes, I found the circle there. All right, so this is just a big circle. And what we need to do is we need to adjust the transform because we don't want it moving up and down vertically like that. So I believe the is negative 90 degrees for the X rotation transform value. And then I believe this is 0.2 is what we want. All right, so the scale we want to be 0.2 across the board. You can also select uniform scale here to make sure that they all move together. Okay, so we have our little mat that's going to be kind of the trip pad for the trigger, for the alarm. We're also going to add ground just to make it look a little more realistic. Ground meaning just a floor of some kind. So I'm going to add disk. The disk looks like a circle. They operate a little bit differently. But again, I'm going to do negative 90. And I'm going to set for the X rotation value, and I'm going to set the transform or the scale to 100. Okay, nope, we don't want to do that. Let's just back. I want it all to be 0. The circle, we're going to go ahead and call this mat. And one important thing to do is make sure that you bring it up so it's a little bit above the disk. You see that? Currently, they are both the same color, and because we have no light in our scene, you can't really see anything anyways. So let's select the disk. Again, it's just going to act as our ground. We'll click Material, and under Color Diffuse, we're going to select, we'll just make it totally white. Maybe not totally white. And then our mat, let's go ahead and select that as, we need to select 2D graphics for this 2D primitive entity, and we don't want it to be white. We're going to select it to be green. Okay. Now, why can't we see anything? I suspect that's because there are no lights in our scene. So we're going to go ahead and click Create Entity, and we are going to select a point light. And we're just going to drag it with those transform gizmos just right about there. Actually, let's go directly above the mat. That looks about right. Okay, why is our mat not turning green? Let's look at this again. It did not take for some reason, so we're going to again change the green. Okay, so there we go. We have our mat, our circle, and our ground. And remember, that mat has to be slightly above the ground. The reason is that if it's at the same y coordinate or y value, then it will not actually detect the mouse hovering over it, which we will need to do shortly. All right, the other thing we're going to do is add that flag. So we're going to go import assets to open the asset library. Once that populates, you will see the Sumerian flag right here. We're going to click that and then hit add or choose add down in the bottom right hand corner. All right, the animated flag will appear in the assets bin over here in the bottom left. What we need to do is drag the entity asset itself, which is that hexagon icon, and drag that into the scene. And there it is. Why is it dark? It's because, well, that light isn't really hitting it too much. So we are going to click that light and drag it up a little bit more. Let's turn up the intensity to, let's see. I'm gonna oops, select the light again. Offset it a little bit so it'll actually reflect off the flag. Okay, so it's a little bit above, a little off to the side. All right, so those are our basic scene setup. Now what we need to do is we need to create some event listeners and some state machines that will all interact with each other with event listeners. So in the state machine, an event will happen or an action will occur, and it'll send out this message. And that one message we'll use over and over again to do several different things. So the first thing we want to do is I want to make sure that when I hover over the mat, it changes colors. So what we need to do is select the mat, and we need to add component over here on the right hand side in the inspector panel. We're going to select state machine. We don't have any behaviors. We don't have any behaviors really over here either. So what we're going to do, that we want to use at least, so we're going to add new behavior by hitting this plus sign. This opens up the state machine editor. What we have here in the state machine editor is the first state. It's empty. It doesn't do anything. So what we want to do is we want to call this wait for hover. I'm going to check my notes just to make sure that I'm doing this right. There's a lot of different moving parts. All right, so what we're going to do now is add a hover action. Entity hover enter. Okay. So what that does is that state is waiting for our mouse to hover over that entity. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add another state, and we're going to call this turn red, because we want the mat to turn red. We're going to add an action, and we're going to search for set material color. That's the action we want. What we have, the set material color action is over here. What we need to do though, the color, we need to select the actual entity that is going to be changing color. So we're going to drag the mat over here, and we want it to turn red. Let's wait on that. I'll add I keep forgetting to do this. We want to change the name of this behavior to hover. We're going to create several behaviors in this walkthrough. So we want to make sure we're keeping them separate, organized. So what happens is when it hovers over, it'll turn red. We also wanted to do something else. We wanted to then wait for us to leave, for the cursor of the mouse to leave hovering over. So what we need to do is add an action to this turn red, because as you see, I can create a transition to this turn red state, but I can't, there's nothing here that allows me to go to transition to another state. So I'm going to delete that transition. I need to add another action using the next or transition on next frame action. This is just an empty action that will then transition to the next action. So it doesn't really do much other than the next frame goes and it goes to the next state. So we add another state, We're going to call this wait for hover. We'll call it wait to stop hover. And then we're going to add an action. And then we're going to search for hover entity, hover exit. And then we're going to add one more state. We want it to change to a different color once we stop hovering. Ideally, we turn it back to green. So we add action, set material color. And I don't remember the exact color of green that is, but that will be close enough. And because we don't want it to stop there, we want it to be able to repeat these actions or these states. I'm also going to call this turn back to green is the name of this state. Again, we need to add a transition on next frame action. And so now we can connect these all together. Another phrase that a lot of us use is wire up this state machine. So let's give this a shot. I press play. I hover, and it turns green, or it turns red, I'm sorry. And then when I stop hovering, it turns back to green. And you can see the transitions happening in the state machine. It goes really quickly from the turn red and turn back to green states because it's transitioning on the next frame. And of course, this is running at multiple frames per second, so it happens very, very fast, and it just kind of, it doesn't skip those states, it just moves through them very quickly. So that's what's going on here. All right, so that is happening accurately. That is doing what we want it to do. However, we also want it to emit, we want other things to happen, and we want to add other state machines and other behaviors, and based on this hovering action. So what we're going to do is I'm going to delete all these transitions because we're going to redo this. Not redo it, we're going to add a few states. We want this to emit a message. A message that will initiate other states. So we're going to call it emit message. We're going to look for the emit message action. Channel is basically the message that it's sending out, and we're just going to call this alert, exclamation point, in all caps. I'm going to go ahead and just copy that. I also need to, again, add a transition on next frame, so it'll actually continue to the next state. We're going to wire these up. And we also do want to add one more state. We want to add another emit message state. That goes flag up. We're going to call it emit message. We're going to add that transition on next frame state. Okay. So what happens here is when I hover over the mat, it emits a message, then it turns red, and then it goes to the state waiting to stop hovering. So then when I stop hovering, it emits another message called the flag up message. We'll get to that in a second. And it turns back to green, which immediately then goes back to wait for hover. So it's waiting for me to hover again. All right, so that is our first behavior. The next thing we want to do is we want to add a behavior that will move the flag up and down. This doesn't really have to do with the alarm system so much. It's just another action or action behavior, state machine behavior we can add. So we'll go ahead and, did I do this correctly? Yes, okay. One thing you want to make sure you do is you expand the flag entity, the parent entity over here in the entities panel, and select the then flag child entity. The reason why this is important is because we don't we don't want the cylinder, the flag pole to move. We just want the flag itself to move. So that's why you got to actually add it to just the flag itself. Okay. All right, so we need to add another behavior. We're going to name this behavior flag up and down. Now we want this to initiate by that message that's emitted, but when we hover. So what do we need to do? We need to add an action to this. Let me first call it listen. And then we're going to add an action called listen. And it's the message that it's listening for is alert exclamation point. We want then it to do something, to go to another state, which we want the flag to go down. Okay, so we call that flag down. I'll make it a little more clear. Flag down. Then we're going to add an action. The action we're going to look for is tween move. This is kind of stands for in between move. What we want it to do is we want the flag to go down 2 units, which is approximately 2 meters. And the easing type is like, how does it move? Does it just go down directly, straight and up and down, or does it kind of drop, or does it start speeding up and then move? That's the easing type. How does it ease into this movement? And we're going to call it, we'll call it elastic. Elastic in out. So it actually happens on both the start and the stop of the movement. And we won't stop there. Okay, so then we want to add another state. We're going to call this listen. Also, we're going to add another listen action. Add that action. So we're going to use the flag. Oh, was it flag up or flag down? Now I can't remember. I think it's flag up. I could be wrong. This might not work exactly. And then we want the flag to go back up when the mouse or the cursor stops hovering. So it hovers, it listens for that message, then the flag will go down when I move the flag off or the cursor off. That emits a message is emitted. The flag is listening for that message. It will then go to a new state called flag up. And we're going to use that tween move again. And this time we want it to go up 2 meters. So in the Y transition, or the Y translation value. We're going to do something, we're going to do bounce for easing type, just to see what that looks like. Okay, so then let's add transitions to all these. Dragging an arrow from one action to the next state. I like to go in a clockwise order, just helps me. So let's see what happens here. When I drag my mouse on the mat, it should change colors, and then the flag should go down. There we go. Now, you see how it's now listening for the flag up event? There it goes. So I did have that right. I did have this flag up message correct. So as soon as it goes down, or I hover on it, then the flag goes down, the thing turns red, and goes back up. So we have 2 different state machines, or 2 different behaviors that are operating on these messages. Okay, so there's another thing we want to do. You noticed in the demo how the lights started flashing. Let's see, what do we need to do? I just realized something was going on there. If you noticed, because I moved my cursor off too quickly for the other transition to complete, it wasn't actually listening for that message for the flag to go up. So essentially I have to stay on there for a little bit because all these states or these behaviors actually have to complete in order for other behaviors to receive that message, if that makes sense. It's not the most important thing right now, but if you're wondering why it doesn't always work, it's because the transitions aren't completing quickly enough, because we just have a certain amount of transitions, and those easing types actually have to happen. So that's why that's happening. All right, so what we want to do is we want to, this flag or this light that we added at the beginning, we want to add a state machine to this entity as well. So we'll add a new behavior. We're going to call this flashing lights. The first thing we wanted to do is we want this, we want the light to turn off. You don't have to, but that's what I'm going to do. So we're just going to go light off. We're going to add an action. And we're going to do set light properties. That's the action we're going to go for. We're going to drag, I need to stop the scene. We're going to drag the light entity on that one, on the entity input there. It doesn't really matter the color, actually. I'm just going to turn the intensity and the specular intensity and the range, all of these to 0. So, and because this light off state is set as the initial state, as soon as we start playing, that light will turn off. There it goes. So you can't actually see anything. Things are happening, but the light is turned off. And so you can't see anything, really. The flag is moving, as you can tell, but nothing else. All right, so to do some other things, we need to add action. This is actually going to be our longest behavior. So we'll actually use the duplicate button to kind of move that along as quickly as possible. We need the transition on next state so we can, or the next frame, so we can move this along to another state. So then we add state. What we're going to do is listen. Yeah, we're just going to call it listen. Now we need to do listen action. Now what message do we want to listen for? We want the light to go on when we hover on. So what was the message that is emitted when the mouse or the cursor hovers on the mat? Alert, exclamation point. Okay, so that's going to happen. But then what do we want to happen? We want the light to turn on and turn red. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this light off state, drag it over here, and call it red. Everything is already duplicated here except for these were 1, and 100. Let's actually do 5 and 5 for the intensity and specular intensity. And then the color we're going to change to red. Now remember, it's going to transition on next frame, and so because that's so fast, you won't even see the light. So what we need is another state to wait for a couple seconds to actually show the light changing. So what we need to, or show the actual light in the scene. So what we need to do is add another state. We're just going to call this wait. Going to call it add action, or click add action, and we're going to search for wait. This is basically, it's just a waiting action. So all it does is just hold for 5 seconds, or 5,000 milliseconds. We're going to do 15, let's just try 1500, which is 1.5 seconds. I take that back. Let's do 500 milliseconds, which is half a second. All right. But we also then want to, you can also scroll in and out to zoom in and out of these. Then I wanted to turn, let's see, what light color do we want to turn? Let's duplicate this state, but we don't want it to be red. We want it to be blue. I'm just trying to mix up the colors here. So then I'm going to change the color to blue. And then I need this to wait for a few seconds, so I'm going to duplicate the wait entity. And then I want it to turn back to red, so I'm going to duplicate a red state. And I need it to wait for half a second, so I need to duplicate a wait entity. Then I want it to go back to blue, so I duplicate the blue. Nope, I need to duplicate the blue. And I need for it to hold for a few seconds, so I add another wait entity. And all it does is just really going back and forth between red, waiting, blue, waiting, red, waiting, blue, waiting. And that should probably do it. So then let's wire these up with transitions. Going from one transition to the next, clicking on the action, not just the state, clicking on the action. See, I sometimes don't click the action and it moves the state. I keep doing that. I'm probably zoomed out too far. So I'm clicking on the action and then moving it to the next state in the sequence. And again, best practice typically with behaviors is to have them loop. Otherwise, it'll only happen once. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Let's press play. So as long as I am actually hovering on it, it'll go back and forth between red and blue. But you see how it takes a few seconds for this state or this behavior to complete. And so if I move my mouse off too quickly before it's done, it's not going to be back waiting for the next message to emit. One thing we want to do is, because we can't see anything, I'm going to add a directional light to this scene. I'm going to change the X rotation to -90. I'm going to turn down the intensity and I'm going to rotate it. Just a little bit, so we can see the mat itself. Otherwise, again, you can't see the ground, you can't see the mat, you can't see anything. So I go on, hover, flashes red and blue. I step off and the flag goes up. Again, if I wait for all these states to complete, it'll happen as expected. If I hover on and off too quickly, then it, again, all the behaviors can't complete their transitions. All right. It's happening as expected. We want to do one more thing. We want to add that sound, that obnoxious alarm sound. How does that work? It's not too complicated. It's actually pretty easy. But we need to add one more behavior. If you look over here in the assets panel and in behaviors, we have a couple behaviors. We have the flag up and down, we have the flashing lights, and we have the hover. This behavior is something else, so I would just ignore that. I think that comes with the actual animated flag itself. But we've created 3 states. We need to create one more state, which is a sound state, or something that will emit a sound. In order to add a sound to the scene, you got to add a sound to some entity within the scene. It doesn't necessarily matter what it is, but I think it's helpful to actually add the sound component, really, to the entity in which is relevant to what you're doing, right? So in this sense, the mat is kind of our central entity that is kind of controlling everything that happens. When something hovers over the mat, it signals all these different behaviors and actions to happen. So we can just add the sound component or our alarm sound to the mat as well. So we go to add component, we add sound, and I need to drag that alarm sound. And I just have this on my computer. It's called alarm sound. It's just something I downloaded that I purchased. And so there it is. And see what else we need to do. That's it. Okay. Then we need to add one more behavior. Sorry, I'm getting something weird on my broadcast. It's showing that I'm not appearing on the screen. So I hope I'm still there. All right, so we need to add one more behavior. And we're going to call this behavior alarm sound. This is a very simple behavior. Again, it's going to start by listening. So we'll add the listen action. And we'll use the, nope, didn't do that, the alert message. And then what do we need to do? We need to add another state. And then we need to add a sound, the play sound action. Because we already added that alarm sound file to our scene, it'll now appear here in this sound drop-down menu, alarm sound. So we really only have two states in this behavior. The listen and then the, I didn't name this one, alarm sound. Okay, now again, like I said before, it's best practice for most behaviors to actually have them loop back and forth. There's only two states, so we want to bring this back here. Otherwise, it will only fire once. If it's not set to listen again, it can't listen, and therefore it cannot play the sound any more than once in the scene. So if you want a behavior to happen or be able to happen multiple times in a scene, it's got to loop around in a circle of some kind. All right, so let's try this. I have the sound turned pretty far down on my computer, but it should work. All right, so we have the scene, flag, it's just waiting there. It's just waiting for some mouse to creep over and trip the alarm. And there it goes. And you see the behavior or the state going back and forth. All right. So there you have it. I'm going to stop this scene. That is a state machine, a scene using the state machine and also event listeners and several different things. Lots of different behaviors going on here. Again, we thank you for joining us. If there's anything that we can do or any content or tutorials you'd like to see, let us know. You can find most of us on Twitch or on Twitter, and also our Slack channel, which is amazonsumerian.slack.com. Thanks for joining us, and join us next time. Thanks.